Everybody, Happy will be speaking next week, and 2 weeks versus digital talk. Today, we're very lucky to have Steve Koonin. Steve, at the age of 21, graduated from Caltech. He then spent 3 years getting a PhD, 3 years as an associate professor, 3 years as an assistant professor. He ended up at a very young age as a full professor at Caltech. After hanging out at Caltech and doing wonderful work in nuclear physics, he has literally many papers, 600, 500, 400 references from nuclear physics days. Some of you may have actually studied from his textbook on computational science. It's in Fortran, that dates you, so the young ones did not see it. He then became provost in 1994 of Caltech. He stayed at Caltech as provost for 10 years. After provost, he moved to British Petroleum, where he was the chief scientist at BP. So this was a very unusual move for somebody, and he was really the driving intellectual force behind their push for alternative energy. After 5 years at BP, he joined the Obama administration, where he was the DOE Undersecretary of Science until 2011. Along the way, he's also become a member of the National Academy of Sciences. He ran Jason for many years. He's been on innumerable numbers of committees, often chairing them. So he's been a significant player in the science of politics and the politics of science. Especially now, the move at cusp because of the science of cities and politics. And so in 2012, Steve became the founding director of the Center for Urban Science and Politics, which is what helps urban science and progress, not politics. Right? Yeah. Stay away from politics. Steve doesn't really stay away from politics, so I don't know. If you Google his name afterwards and put it on climate change, you'll see that Steve does not shy from politics, as well as his opinion, openly and honestly. So that's always a good thing, I think. And today's talk is Adventures in Urban Informatics. Steve will tell us about his vision for combining science, hard science, and soft science with the study of people and the cities they live in. Let's welcome Steve.
So it's great to be back here. I think I first came to this campus probably about 42 years ago or so, and so it's great to see lots of people I know and hear about what's going on. As Jonathan said, just about 5 years ago, I took over the founding of the Center for Urban Science and Progress, which is an institute within NYU focused on the intersection of cities and data. As you can see in this announcement here, again, almost exactly 5 years ago, I was standing in the back right. I let all the luminaries take credit for the real estate deal that created us, and I had no idea what we were doing at the time, or would be. 5 years later, I think we've got a much better sense of what the science of cities, and in particular urban informatics, is all about, and I'll try to tell you a little bit about that. Let me start with the motivation first. The vision is that we can improve cities by really understanding them in a data-driven way. Cities are probably the most complicated things that we humans produce and interact with, and their understanding over the years is less than complete. And so what we are about is acquiring, integrating, and analyzing data to try to improve cities through better understanding of them. That means we develop new data technologies not only to acquire, but to analyze. There's a science of cities to be done, and there are innumerable applications for the government, for citizens, for the private sector, to pursue if one can truly understand cities in a data-driven way. Let me remind you that cities are really where society happens. In the developed world, about 80% of us live in urban areas. Worldwide, we've just crossed 50%, and by the middle of the century, we'll see about 70 to 75% of people living in cities. So as Jeff West says, another physicist gone bad into cities, cities are both the source of our problems over the next several decades, but they're also where the problems will be solved. When I came out of the government, at the end of 2011, I started to ask myself, what does it mean to instrument a city the way a scientist would? and came to realize that there were really three buckets in which you would like to try to understand the city. First is the infrastructure, the roads, the buildings, the utility grids, not only their condition, but how they're operating, traffic flowing, is the grid balanced. The second is the environment, meteorology, flora, fauna, but also noise, pollution. And the last and most interestingly, but somehow problematic also, are the people. You can't understand cities without understanding the people in them. Cities are built by people, for people. That immediately takes us into privacy issues, and I'll have more to say about that. And if I don't, please ask me.
So you have to.
But in principle, you would like to know location, communications, economic activity, nutrition, health, and so on. And the underlying
Hour and a half. Hour and a half.
we can better engage citizens with their government. We can enable the private sector to provide new services. Everybody's interested in what goes on in cities. If you're a retailer, you want to know where to site your stores. If you're a banker, you want to know about the risks in your loans. If you're a political campaign, you want to know where to target your advertising. And then finally, of course, this is a very different way of doing social science and understanding how people behave. The next thing to understand is that there is a lot of data out there already, and the amount is growing exponentially. The city by itself generates various organic data flows, administrative records, traffic fines, taxes. There are operational records of traffic, mass transit, utilities. There are transactional data. And of course, these days you also have social media as a way of getting some insight into what's going on in the city. And then there are the sensors. We're all carrying sensors in our pockets these days that are increasingly powerful. You've got portal sensors for vehicles and for people. And you've got fixed sensors in the buildings. I'm sure that there are temperature and light sensors in this room, which are probably on the net in one way or another. And then maybe most interesting for those of us with a physics orientation, there's the opportunity to try out novel technologies, new ways of looking at the city. Various kinds of imagery, gravity magnetic. There's a project going on here with Jonathan and collaborators on magnetic sensing of the city. You can go on. So when we started, we were a new center, and you've got to have some sense of what you're doing. The city government that was part of the partnership that we are really wanted something beyond academics, and so you needed some kind of strategy to impact the city. And I think the strategy for the research really had a number of elements to it. First was to focus on the data. I wasn't going to work on new ways to develop concrete or building integrated photovoltaics. Those are important, but the data is really interesting because it brings diverse researchers together. It can be a much quicker improvement in a city than having to change the infrastructure. And frankly, as a former provost, it's a lot cheaper. You didn't have to build labs. We focused on New York City mostly. Why is that? Well, first of all, that was our location. Second, having multiple data sets about one city is in principle more interesting than having the same data set about multiple cities, since you can start to do correlation studies. And then finally, a lot of what we do and have done involves intense interaction with the city government, and one city government is more than enough to manage at once. On the other hand, as I mentioned, there are centers in other cities that are doing the same kind of work. The third was to own the data. I wanted to build a center that really had a deep familiarity with the data, what was good, what was bad, what data sets were out there. Ideally, for academic work, you want differential access. If you can get first cut at the data, you're ahead of everybody else. And then I wanted to build unique sensor systems to really advance the science. And then finally, to create facilities and capabilities. Certainly in physics, particularly here at Berkeley, the home of big science, but also Caltech, a number of other universities, you understand that forefront user facilities that nucleate faculty, let you do things you cannot do otherwise, help you attract and retain people, are one very effective way of advancing the science. And so we started, as you'll see in a moment, to create some user facilities. So among those user facilities are the data facility, and I'll have a word to say about that in a moment, something we call quantified community, an urban observatory, and I'll explain all those also. And then a number of themes have emerged in what we're doing. Building informatics, understanding the operation and more static characteristics of the 1.2 million buildings in the city. Mobility is an obvious theme. There's a project about sound in New York City, which I'll describe to you, and then energy generally has emerged as a theme. Within those themes, we've executed now probably close to 40 smaller projects in collaboration with the city or in collaboration with some of the businesses in the cities, and I'll try to give you a sense of those as well. But what I want to do now is go through a sampler of some of the things that are available to us and what we've done with them. Michael Bloomberg is, as you might imagine, a very data-driven guy. And in the last 3 or 4 years of his last administration, created something called the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, whose job it was to integrate or at least collect data from across the city agencies and at the very least put them in one place and more profitably to do something interesting by analyzing the data. This is now a 3 or 4 year old picture, but it illustrates the diversity of data sets that the city has and has assembled in one place. Everything from transportation, sanitation, housing, weather, finance, parking violations, and so on. It's all there. The city does not have the capability or the funding to do something interesting with this data. And of course, we have access to it. Some of it requires extensive negotiations with lawyers, but nevertheless, the data are there. They generally turn out to be not very interoperable. So there are, for example, 4 ways of denoting buildings in New York City. That long street address, something called BIN, building identification number, and tax lot. You've got to make those work. And then the data sets are often rather dirty and they need to be cleaned up. Again, just a sense of what's out there. This is federal data from the Census Bureau, the American Community Survey, or ACS. And this happens to be a map of the Gini Index, which is about income inequality. But what is impressive to me, certainly, is the spatial resolution with which you can get these data. And it's invaluable in taking the landscape on which the higher frequency processes of the city play out. There are, of course, just a gee whiz picture tweets. Actually not as useful, I think, as people would have thought, in part because only a small fraction of them are geolocated, and there's just a lot of noise. Society, you want to study society? That's what you got. A word about the data facility. Julia Lane, who is a labor economist and is came to us just about 2 years ago to build this integrated omnivorous ingestion of all manner of data about New York City, curation, multi-level access for privacy or proprietary reasons, the tools that one needs to analyze these data so that ordinary mortals can do it rather than having to be a computer scientist, and then training for the researchers in privacy, ethics, as well as how to use the data sets. This is up and running. There's a catalog on the web. If you sign up as a user, you need a friend inside Custom, you can get a sense of what's out there. We also then established, and this is really the domain of Constantine Contacosta, who's an assistant professor at Custom. My thought when we started this was if I were a neuroscientist, one way to understand the brain is to instrument the heck out of a square centimeter of cortex. And whether it's electrodes or other tools, to really understand, try to understand the brain as a whole by looking at a small section of it. And could we do the same for the city? Take a community of, let's say, 10,000 people, and of course, with their permission and knowledge, instrument the heck out of that. And so arose the idea of what we call quantified community. It was originally expected to be just one of the buildings at Hudson Yards. It has since blossomed into a neighborhood in Lower Manhattan, around Water Street, and now in Red Hook in Brooklyn, and soon in 4 other neighborhoods in the city. So here's an example of what Constantine and collaborators have done in Brooklyn. There are environmental sensors, and maybe most interestingly, Wi-Fi access points. And so you can start to get information about mobility and environment. Together with cooperation of the businesses, you can get economic activity and start to understand how it all plays together. I think this is a wonderful chart. This happens to be from Lower Manhattan. It is a month worth of Wi-Fi pings. There's a network of about 50 Wi-Fi access points that Constantine has access to the data. You may not know it, but when the Wi-Fi is turned on your phone, it pings the nearest access point, whether you do something or not. And so by analyzing which phones one sees during working hours only, which phones one sees after hours or on the weekends, you can separate into residents, workers, and passersby. This is an example of that day by day over a month in July. You can see quite clearly, for example, the weekends, and you can see July 4th, holiday on a Monday. And so this is a good example of one of the central science themes that we're pursuing, which is a pulse of the city. I'll have more to say about that in a minute, but you can see that there's quite a bit of day-to-day regularity, although not perfectly so. Another example of what can be done with records data, this is an analysis of building energy efficiency in New York City. In 2009, the city passed a law, Local Law 84, that mandated that all buildings above 50,000 square feet would self-report their annual energy use: electricity, natural gas, heating oil, and steam. And so this is an analysis of the energy use intensity, kilobTUs per square foot per year, of 1,100 office buildings in the city. And you can see that there's quite a spread among them. Some buildings use 6 times as much energy per square foot as others. What is that? Is that the way the building is constructed, the way it's operated? Is it the kind of activity that goes on in the building, or is it plain old misreporting? We've now got 4 or 5 years of this data. You can start to untangle those factors. Here's the same kind of histogram for residential buildings, 7,500. Again, even with this more unimodal distribution, you can see that some buildings are using 2 to 3 times as much energy per square foot. You can start to drill into the data in various ways. This is a cut of the data as a function of the year in which the building was built. And if you just focus in on the light blue line, which are the office buildings, energy use intensity, you can see that the newer buildings use more energy per square foot than the old ones. Is it glass curtain walls, for example? That would be a prime suspect, or is it the activity? Again, I think the betting here is that it's the architecture or the building construction. Let me shift a little bit in a domain, but the same kind of records data. Taxis are a great favorite for what we do. In 2009, also, the city mandated that all yellow cab rides be recorded. And so we have the start location, the stop location, the time, the fare, the tip, the driver, the medallion number, and so on, for every one of the 180 million rides a year that the yellow cabs make. It's about 500,000 a day, actually. And they're really interesting, not just as a measure of traffic, but you can ask, are the tips bigger on a sunny day or a cloudy day, things of that sort. This is a graph, again, showing pulse of the city, the number of rides per day in the city in 2011 and 2012. You can see a weekly cycle, low on Sunday, high on Friday, and then you can see anomalies. That big dip at the end of August in 2011 was a set of weekends that culminated in Hurricane Irene, and then the dip at the end of October in 2012 was Superstorm Sandy. We have detailed data that shows both the disruption and then gradual recovery of the system from these events. You can also see Thanksgiving, Christmas, a half marathon in the city and so on. What is impressive is how repeatable these things are. The researchers here, Claudio Silva and Juliana Ferrer, took 1 week in May, 3.5 million trips, and segregated them according to the trips that originated at the train station in green and those that originated at the airports in red. In the upper panel is the number of trips per unit time in 15-minute intervals, and again, how repeatable that is, although with variations, suggesting that there are ways of doing data-driven modeling and data-driven anomaly prediction for what's going on in the city. I'm going to skip through some of this traffic discussion and move on to sound. So at some point, we decided we needed to start putting out our own sensors, and we funded and now have gotten NSF funding for something called Sonic Sounds of New York City, which is, so a story. I grew up in New York City, and when I moved back about 5 years ago, it was wonderful to be living there, except the sound was really annoying me. It is a very noisy place. There are noise regulations, but they don't get enforced, and so I figured we could do something about it. We put 3 years of postdoc funding into it, and eventually developed a project in close collaboration with the city government. This is called Sonic, and what was developed was a box, which has got, of course, microprocessor, communications equipment. The data gets exfiltrated by Wi-Fi, and most importantly, it's got an acoustically calibrated MEMS microphone that's good to 2 dB, which is good enough for noise code enforcement. The boxes are $85 a piece, maybe cheaper if we make more of them, maybe 100 to start. There's one of the boxes deployed on the ledge of a building above a street. You can see the windsock that is covering the microphone, the cable that's exfiltrating the data, and the pigeon spikes that make sure that it stays reasonably clean. Real world problems, right? Experimental science. The current deployment, this is somewhat old, is around the square of Manhattan. We have actually 30 nodes up and running now, streaming sound pressure level data back 24/7. We'll have 100 by the end of, I would say not by June. And they're also taking random snippets of audio. If you've got 100 audio streams, it's not at all clear how you would analyze that. And so from the very beginning, what they did was to develop a real-time machine listening algorithm that does feature extraction from the audio stream. That both because you can't handle the data volume of the raw data, but also because it's illegal to record audio on the streets of New York City unless you're present. That's not true of video, but the audio rule is a leftover from wiretapping regulations. And so we're taking audio, they're taking audio in 10-second snippets. You can't understand anything about conversation in 10 seconds, but you can use it to train up the listening algorithm. And let's see if the audio is going to work. And so that was a car horn. No. For those of you who are machine learning or machine processing people, the sound gets converted into a sonogram, and then image recognition technologies are applied to sonogram to do the identification. All right, so let's deploy the sensors. And then I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about a different set of sensors we've been deploying. This picture, which I pulled off the web now just about 5 and a bit years ago, was the inspiration. It's an infrared picture of Lower Manhattan taken from Brooklyn at night. And if you look carefully, it's pretty interesting. I'll start with that building, which is a residential building, and you can see that the pattern is variegated. And basically, you can read the thermostat for every apartment in that building. That's pretty interesting. That building turns out to have a data center in it. We have correlative data about all the buildings we look at, and we know it's got a data set. And so it's hot on the bottom and hot at the top where the vents are, and otherwise doesn't show much heat. And that set of buildings is public housing, and in typical New York City fashion, the heat's turned off and the windows are open to keep the apartments. Not very energy efficient. So if you think about it for a while, this is pretty interesting. It's a single sensor, one infrared camera in this case. It's synoptic in its coverage. There are a couple hundred buildings in this scene. I'll show you images where we're looking at about 1,000 buildings. It's persistent. Namely, I can just sit and watch. It's not like a satellite that goes overhead once every couple of days if you're lucky. It's also non-permissive. I didn't need anybody's permission to go look at the buildings. And then finally, it's highly granular. I can see down to the individual apartment. And so Greg Dober and others, Mr. Gandhari at NYU, Greg has got an astronomy background and decided that cities were more interesting than the galaxy. We started pursuing this kind of theme using several different observational modalities. The visible, in the infrared, hyperspectral in both shortwave and long-wave infrared, and also hypertemporal. And I thought I'd give you a sample of some of the phenomenology we see and some of the applications. So I will start out with, let's see, I got a picture, but I don't have a back. Design. So that's the view from our offices in downtown Brooklyn. To calibrate you, you're looking at Manhattan across the East River. The Empire State Building in the upper left is about 3.8 miles away. This is an image taken with an 8 megapixel camera and a 1-inch lens. So nothing very fancy at all. The first question you want to ask is, well, what am I looking at? And fortunately, we have a LiDAR topography data set of the city, which has got 1 foot horizontal and vertical resolution. And so you can imagine it's a simple exercise in geometry to fuse that topography together with the image to identify every pixel in the image with a building. Namely, you just shoot a ray from the camera out and ask where do I first intersect the topography, and then drop down to the XY plane, and that gives you a geographical location. Once you have the geographical location, you know the building, and then you have an enormous amount of city data about each building that you can tap into. So we know what we're looking at. This is just color-coded by distance, nothing very fancy, but there is on the map every building in the scene. It's a swath, as you see, up the east side of Manhattan, looking north. A little more data wizardry. This is now the image color-coded by energy use intensity. Remember, we had the energy use data. And moreover, we have outlined in black every building that's heated by heavy heating oil, which is an important, probably the major source of particulates in New York City. So you can fuse all these data sets together. If you're interested, by the way, the red buildings tend to be hospitals, which use a lot of energy, and broadcast studios, which also use a lot of energy because they operate around the clock. So this is a time lapse, one image every 10 seconds through a night. The images have to be registered because the camera's moving around in the wind and so on. And what's interesting is you see the lights go on and off in the residential section as activity is happening. We just saw the Empire State Building go off. Greg is an astronomer, and so the first thing, of course, was let's do light curves. And so these were early days, and he picked out by hand 4,200 windows in the image. We do that automatically now. And for each of those windows, for each night of observation, you can build a light curve. And this is a graph of the light curve for some window on some night. I have no idea which. And sort of in front about 7 p.m. It dims somewhat at 9 o'clock. It's interesting that these tend to be midnight, 3 o'clock, the baby woke up or insomnia or who knows what. And of course, everybody asks, well, what about privacy? As one of my colleagues said, you're invading privacy on a massive scale. And the answer is no. First of all, we immediately went to the IRB, which is the board of the university. I'm sure there's one here at Berkeley that concerns human subject matter, human subject experiments. And they said, why are you bothering us? Everybody looks in everybody else's window anyway. And in fact, New York City has the highest per capita sale of telescopes and binoculars. But you know, we said, okay, we need to be above board about this. So we have fuzzed, I don't have a picture, but we have fuzzed out the resolution. And the atmosphere does a pretty good job anyway, the ordinary atmospheric scene, of fuzzing it out so you can't see what's going on in any particular window. And then finally, all of the data analysis is done aggregated and anonymously, so we've got no idea which particular windows we're looking at. Nevertheless, the aggregated patterns are really interesting. This is 3 weeks of early observations. Just like real astronomy, some nights drop out. And what you see is a pretty repetitive pattern on the top in orange of the off transitions, and on the bottom in blue, the on transitions. And okay, so yet another pulsing of the city, so what? Well, you can start to make use of the granularity in interesting ways. You can take one night, let's say a Monday, and sort the residential window curves according to when you see the big off in those windows. And that's shown in this first graph. Basically, it is the cumulative of one of their distributions in the upper panel. And then you can take the same data for Tuesday, but with the same ordering, and see that they decorrelate. But if you take the Tuesday data and put them in the natural Tuesday ordering, you get the pattern back again. And so people are random at the individual level, but in aggregate, the pattern is highly repeatable. You can also look at the correlation functions of the individual windows and discover that about 6% of the lights are on timers. Interesting? I don't know. Here's something a little more practical. This is about a minute's worth, maybe 2 minutes worth of daytime imagery in the upper panel, and in the bottom panel is the difference image. So we've taken out the background just by subtraction. And if you look at the bottom carefully, you can see this big white blob coming out. And we have color-coded it in the image in the upper right. What is that? Well, it's that. When boilers fire up, if they're using heating oil, they don't have the stoichiometry quite right, and you get these big clouds of black soot. which, as I mentioned, are the major source of pollution in the city. And so we've got a way of watching with one sensor about 1,000 buildings in the scene in real time and helping the environmental protection folks identify who's dirty in the air and where is this stuff going. That's pretty interesting. A couple of more imaging demos, and then I'll say a little bit about education. We acquire a hyperspectral instrument, a shortwave hyperspectral instrument. This is an instrument that, instead of taking images in 3 colors like red, green, and blue, takes images in 800 and some odd colors from 0.4 to 1 micron. And so every pixel that you have in an image has a spectrum associated with it. I show in the bottom left some representative spectra of different lighting technologies. LEDs, high pressure sodium, CFLs, and so on. They have all different spectra. And in the upper panel, the big one, we've taken a broad view of the city and are able to type the lighting technology of every light that we see. Passively, non-permissively, with high granularity. And then on the bottom is an inset that shows the blow-up of the Manhattan Bridge. You can see that the necklace lights are LEDs and the roadway lights are high pressure sodium and so on. Why is this interesting? Well, if you're trying to market new lighting technologies, you can understand where you might want to target your advertising. You can study the penetration of lighting technologies as a function of socioeconomic group. And we think, although we've not yet demonstrated it, that you could study rebound, which is a phenomenon whereby if I gave you a more efficient light, you might be tempted to use it more often, and so partially negate the efficiency gains that the technology offers. It's pretty easy to imagine how you would study that. So, grid dynamics are another thing we've been looking at. Federico Bianco is another astronomer. Every light that you see, or almost every light except the most modern technologies, is flickering at 120 hertz. And there's probably information in that flicker. The grid frequency itself is not interesting, but the phases of the various lights could well be interesting. And so we put a LCD shutter in front of an ordinary camera, ran the shutter at 119.75 hertz, and beat down 120 hertz to a quarter hertz, and then started taking images. That panel is a time sequence of one such image, and if you focus in on that source, for example, you can see it's oscillating. Other sources in the image are also oscillating. If you blow up that image, it's not, well, this is better than some stars that one sees, so it's not so terrible in real astronomy. And then you can use pretty standard data processing technologies to do a Fourier transform, extract the frequency, which I mentioned is not so exciting, but the phase is really quite interesting. We see phases shift suddenly and over long term, maybe an hour or two, as new load comes on, new generators come onto the grid. And we think this is a pretty interesting way of studying it. One or two more imaging things, and then I'll wrap up with some discussion of the education program. I managed to convince a donor to give us enough money to rent for a couple of weeks a long wave hyperspectral imager. This is an instrument that goes from 7 to 13 microns and 128 channels. It is built and operated by the Aerospace Corporation, and the Air Force actually owns it. It typically flies in an airplane and is used for finding people doing bad things in jungles or deserts with chemicals. But nobody's ever trained it on a city before, and that's what you see in this kind of persistent mode. So we spent 10 days in Hoboken, New Jersey, watching the west side of Manhattan with this instrument. This first example I'll show you is not in spectrally resolved imagery, but in integrated imagery. So we're looking in the thermal IR at about 10 micron peak sensitivity. These are two images taken about 2 minutes apart, and the difference image is on the bottom. And of course, you see some plumes. This was done during the day, by the way. It's not a very nice day, I remember, in April of 2014, 2015. The years are starting to run together. Maybe 2015, sorry. And the difference image shows some plumes of people burning stuff on the tops of buildings, natural gas, oil, steam. But then there's that spot in the far right of the image in the middle, which was not there in the first image, it's there in the second, and we sort of got intrigued about that. And of course, as I mentioned, we have building ID for everything we do, so it turns out to be that building, which, if you know New York City, is on the West Side Highway. What's interesting about it, apart from it being near the Google building in New York, is those 8 cooling towers on top of the building. And so we're pretty sure we caught one of those cooling towers firing up. And so that raises the interesting possibility that you could passively watch the HVAC operation of many buildings at once in real time over the city and start to learn about urban heat island, for example, energy use, roofing, and I'm going to skip this one, which is about urban heat island. So let me switch to spectrally resolved imagery. We were surprised when we started to try to identify the chemical plumes, and of course this is done again, as we did with the lighting technology, by analyzing the spectrum behind each pixel of what we see, that there was an awful lot of Freon-22 around the city, chlorofluoromethane. For those of you who don't know, this is an ozone leader. It is you may not purchase this chemical in the U.S. anymore. You may not build refrigeration equipment that uses it. But if you have legacy stocks or legacy equipment, I think you've got until 2021 or something like that to get rid of it. So look at that. There's a whole haze of this stuff over Midtown Manhattan. We see it both in emission and absorption. And boy, it would be real nice to be able to help the Department of Environmental Protection identify who's leaking and try to cut down on those leaks. So far, we've just done this proof of principle. This is 10 days from one site. We're trying to get money out of the NSF to buy a couple of instruments and then so to be able to try and one more imagery, and then we'll move on. We were surprised to see an acetone plume almost every afternoon for a few hours. And there it is. You can see the black spot. It's quite clearly there. The instrument is spectacularly sensitive. At 5 miles, you can take a can of computer screen cleaner and let off a burst, and you'll see that. So there's acetone. And we thought immediately nail Salon. We ID'd the building as 677 Washington Street on the west side of Manhattan. It turns out at 679 Washington Street, you can look up, is Couture Cleaners who do on-site dry cleaning. And so we're watching them dump acetone into the atmosphere. Perfectly legal, but nevertheless an indication of what you can do. I really wanted to find a drug lab if we could. It seemed pretty bad, I suppose, but it was probably the wrong neighborhood to be looking. Let me do a computer science example for you. We've got a little video which is illustrative of some of the work that the computer scientists are doing. One of the challenges in urban informatics is just integrating lots of data sets together in a user-friendly way. And they took on a project which is called Urbane, which is done in collaboration with architects and city planners to be able to provide a tool that lets the domain experts ask what-if questions by integrating multiple data layers together. And they've done a little video which I will try to play for us. It's about 2 or 3 minutes long. Let's see if it goes.
The characteristics that shape the quality of your art. To help answer these questions, traditional multi-resolution framework that enables a data-driven approach for decision-making in the design of technology development. Through a data-driven understanding of the existing cities and tools to evaluate potential new developments, architects, developers, and planners can both better collaborate and make more informed decisions. The creation of Urbane poses several challenges. First, is integrating 2D and 3D image data sets from different sources and the don't share form. Second, is the ability to perform 3D impact analysis, such as landmark visibility and sky exposure in real time. Finally, creating a 3D interface that allows users to view and filter data sets and analysis at multiple scales. Urbane allows users to seamlessly explore the city based on multiple 2D and 3D data layers. For example, noise, where we can see a surprising density of noise complaints on this street right next to a high school. And subway access, where the highest subway access density is in the financial district. The data can be explored at different resolutions, the city, neighborhood, and buildings. The opacity of the 3D buildings can be controlled for better visualization of data layers. Urbane uses a parallel coordinates chart that allows for easy and intuitive filtering of the data sets. Here we look at neighborhoods for various attributes such as subway access and noise. The bold blue line represents the average of all Manhattan neighborhoods. The bold red line is the user-selected neighborhood, here, financial district. The parallel chart allows the user to vary a single element within a filtered scenario and see the range in neighborhoods that meet the changing criteria. As the noise threshold decreases, but jobs and subways are constant, we can see the range of noisy to quiet neighborhoods that meet this criteria. Filtering of various attributes allows users to understand the characteristics of Manhattan neighborhoods. At the neighborhood scale, the same filtering system is applied to individual buildings. The blue line represents the average for the selected neighborhood. Here, we filter individual buildings for attributes such as built area, crime, and noise, identify sites for potential development. Within that criteria, we vary crime from low to high, seeing a shift in sites from north to south. Once specific sites have been identified, Urbane gives users the ability to import geometry generated in other 3D modeling software and replace existing buildings, testing different tower sizes and designs on multiple sites. Here we see user input geometry color-coded by program, residential is yellow, hotel is purple, and office is blue. Here is a range of mixed-use buildings being tested. Once buildings are imported, Urbane can compute the impact of imported buildings on sky exposure at the street level and the impact on the visibility of the existing context of the selected buildings. This analysis can be used to evaluate the trade-offs between the value of the development and its impact on the character of the neighborhood. This can facilitate the design and development process between architects, developers, and city planners.
Okay, a couple words about education, and then I'll wrap up. Part of the deal that created us was that we would help train the workforce in New York City to do data-driven things. And so we now, 4 years ago, established a one-year master's program, a part of in science and informatics. The students get about 30% data, databases, visualization, simple data mining technologies. They get about 30% cities, how do cities work, what are the problems, and then about 40% in a capstone project that they execute in teams of 4 or 5. I'll have more to say about that in a moment. Classes range from data to civic governance in cities, sensing, things of that sort. The first class started in 2013. And we had the mayor at the time, good number of people from abroad. Many of them had been out for a while after their bachelor's degree. The class grew from 23 or 24 up to 64 in the second year. And interestingly, in this year, 6 of the students were also New York City employees doing the program part-time. They bring a very different perspective to the classroom, and of course, take the information, the training back with them. One of the students in the first class was a 10-year New York City detective. And so needless to say, classroom discussions with him had a very different flavor than usual academic discussions. Let's see, there's the third class. The fourth class is about the same size, 85, 87, 90, something like that. Diversity of backgrounds. Data scientists, physical scientists, civil engineers, social scientists, cognitive psychologists, political scientists, etc. We bring them all together, we train them up, and they just do wonderful things. It's really interesting. Some of the capstone projects that we executed last year, these are projects that take about 4 months. They're done in teams of about 5 students, and they have typically a city agency sponsor together with a faculty mentor. And they range from data poverty in previous years, where do you site pre-K facilities, illegal dumping that can go on. So these are smaller, very practical things relative to the broader, more fundamental research I described previously. We work with all kinds of New York City agencies. You really need to work closely with the city if you're going to do this kind of work effectively. There's a sense of where they go: big companies, small companies, city agencies, nonprofits of various kinds. Very much in demand, as you may know, data is hot on the employment market these days. This is our last chart, just a couple of further points. What are we missing? You know what, I'm just going to leave this up, and if somebody wants to ask about some of these things during the Q&A, I'm happy to do that. So thanks for your attention, and happy to take comments and questions.
So thank you, Steve, for a great talk. There's time for 2 questions. Yes.
A couple of years ago, I came across churches that used laser particle detectors. I was wandering around, they were customers, and I was surprised. I come to this in the area. I know you don't measure that. Have you thought of
We have low sensitivity laser, not laser, but low sensitivity particle detectors out in the Brooklyn deployment. You know, you can go about sensing in 2 different ways. I had a wonderful discussion this morning about measuring various gases being done here in Berkeley. Or you can try these synoptic methods. Clearly, they have to come together in some way. And you'll need to understand the upscale and downscale. Just, you know, why aren't we measuring particulates more generally? You can fill a blackboard in 5 minutes with the kind of stuff you would like to do. Limited resources, you've got to start somewhere.
Steve, I was interested to note that one of your priorities was differential access. Can you speak to a little about the tension between creating data sets for internal use and serving the public?
Yeah. So New York City has an open data portal that lists about 1,500 open data sets that the agencies just put up there. But there are many other data sets that one can have closed access to. If you're trying to help the city agencies in particular, you know, differential access is not a problem at all, right? You're just trying to help the city as a contractor would, for example, or academic. If you're trying to do science, you do run afoul of open data policies when you publish, and we haven't really faced that issue yet in the work we're doing. The sensor data that we acquire, we've yet to establish a policy for open access. It's not obvious that we will. I mean, certainly if you work at a big telescope after a year or something, you got to do that, but heck, I didn't use anybody's money to build these sensor facilities. It's not obvious that we have an obligation to open it up. And if we did, who's got the capacity to handle terabytes a year of imagery data, right? So it's, I would say, largely unexplored territory.
So Steve, you touched on the logistics of the whole data access, you said that hiding the data you are mentioning. But can your data disappear? Since the interface is
We have addressed that issue hypothetically and not in practice yet. So you could imagine that the police come to us and say, was the light on in that window on August 19th of last year? And I think my default reaction would be talk to the NYU lawyers. You know, I think from my point of view, if it's ordinary, law enforcement, I'd be really averse to giving that data away. On the other hand, if it becomes a national security issue, then I think that's a different conversation. But we haven't faced it yet in reality.
But if you can do it, then a number of organizations can do it, and they may be doing it right now.
Perhaps. Okay.
Any questions? I'll ask one question, Steve,
Yeah.
which is, what about error bars? So you're coming from a physics background and you're interacting with social scientists and data scientists and truth be told, I spent the year at Cusp, a great year. Best views I've ever had, even with the views here, out of the building we were in. So what about the error bar? How do you give the other kinds of scientists the appreciation to error bars, and how do you train physicists that maybe error bars, you know, have to be understood in the context of the quality of the data?
Yeah. Because as physicists, we have our, you know, we're trained from the very beginning, right? Freshman lab. What are the error bars, right? The more sophisticated social scientists certainly have a very sophisticated understanding. Statisticians, you know, even better than the physicists in some ways. But many people don't, and particularly the policymakers or decision makers that we have to interface with don't. And you know, it's a hard stop. We've got to do it. Look, the world generally doesn't understand error bars. I sit sometimes in Washington and look at DoD budgets that are projected out 10 years with non-significant figures. It's an ongoing challenge. I should say the interaction between the physical scientists or the engineers and the social scientists is still a very difficult one. Language, what is significant, what it means to have a graduate student, research project. The physicists are used to working in large teams, social scientists less so. Entirely gone. I don't want to dump on the social scientists. They do great stuff, and they're organized well to use the methods that they have had. These are new methods, and different kind of organization may be appropriate.
Steve, it seems like satellites would be an excellent way to look at a place like New York City.
Yeah.
Or even drones, you get airborne.
Just last week, I had a conversation with the relevant city agencies. We have a new faculty member who's a civil engineer, and her thing is extraordinarily high resolution LiDAR scans of cities. And she's done some work before coming to New York in Dublin, and it's spectacular, you know, down a fraction of a centimeter, what you can see in terms of facades crumbling and materials and so on. So to get started in New York, she's only just arrived since September. She'd like to do an overflight of some section of the city, a square kilometer or two. And it's an incredible bureaucratic exercise to get permission to do that. You know, either the helicopter or the plane and fixed wing, it's not clear which end. It's going to have to go back and forth, like the plow in the field. And that's a very unusual flight pattern. People will get upset and so on. You may not fly drones in the city. So that's out for the moment. You know, you can have other fantasies of Global Hawk at 70,000 feet looking down into the urban canyons persistently, but we're a long way from having that sort of.
Okay, one more question, Dima?
One single line is actually a cell phone is a collection of fundamental sensors and also a computer. We use a bunch of cell phones.
The Sound project has that dimension to it. I didn't mention it. Not so much for a collection of the data, but to engage the community. I'm naturally suspicious of the quality of the data that comes from distributed citizen-based sensing, but I remain to be convinced. But yes, of course, it's an interesting. You know, more generally, let's just say the RF spectrum in cities is very rich, and you could learn interesting things just by listening.
As a physicist been here with Steve, it was kind of a fantastic experience. You know, I got to visit the garbage dumps and the police and the fire. And let's thank Steve for one.
Okay, good.